My name is Cecilia Quinn, and on that Thursday morning in Houston, I believed the flight would be nothing more than a simple passage home. The air was sticky with humidity, and the jet bridge felt like a hospital hallway, more than a gateway to somewhere promising. I carried nothing glamorous, just jeans, a worn sweatshirt, sneakers that had seen too many rainy sidewalks, and around my neck, my mother's old silver chain with the tiny charm engraved CQ. I boarded quietly, head low, and slid into seat 2A of first class. I did not flaunt it. I did not smile. I only wanted peace. For a moment, I thought I might have it. The leather seat held me with an unfamiliar softness, and I tried to disappear into it. A man in a navy blazer across the aisle glanced at me, then dismissed me with the flick of his eyes back to his email. That suited me. I wanted to be invisible. Then she arrived. My sister, Valora Quinn, tall, confident blonde streak pulled into a perfect bun that screamed authority. Clipboard clutched like a weapon. She moved down the aisle as if she owned the air between rows. She was not supposed to be on this flight. The moment her eyes landed on me, her mouth curved not in surprise and not in affection, but in disgust. She leaned closer under the pretense of adjusting the overhead bin and whispered words that landed sharper than metal. "You are just the maid. Dare you sit in first class?" The sentence came out with practiced venom perfectly pitched for the man in 2B, to hear perfectly designed to shrink me. My heart jolted, but I kept my hands folded. I said only, "Good morning, Valora," soft and steady. She straightened, eyes narrowing. "That is first class. You are in the wrong seat." My phone already showed the digital boarding pass. I held it up without trembling. She did not even touch it, only scoffed loud enough that passengers in row 3 looked up. "You always had a knack for sneaking in back doors." It was the same tone she had used at our mother's funeral, the same tone that made sure our father never saw me as more than the quiet one. The whispers around us thickened. Then she raised her voice. "You are just the maid. How dare you sit here?" The words cut through the cabin like spit across glass. I felt heat bloom across my cheeks. Not shame, but fire. A boy across the aisle whispered to his mother, "Why is that lady so mean?" The mother hushed him, but her eyes met mine with pity. Another passenger angled her phone. Valora noticed. She turned to the camera with a smile, pretending it was a simple seat mix-up. My hands clenched, but I remained still. Then, without warning, her hand lifted and struck my face. The slap cracked in the silence of the cabin. Gasps erupted. A drink spilled. A sharp hiss sliced the air. My head tilted slightly from the impact, but my body did not rise. I straightened my collar instead, fingers brushing the silver charm against my skin. I remembered my mother's voice telling me, "You do not need to yell to be right." The sting burned hot, but behind it, a steel clarity surfaced. Passengers stared wide-eyed, some horrified, some frozen in the strange thrill of witnessing family ruin play out before takeoff. I did not move. Valora loomed above me, chest rising, fast eyes blazing with the confidence of someone who always believed she could humiliate me without consequence. She thought the silence of the cabin was her shield. She was wrong. I slid my hand into my bag and pulled out my phone. No frantic motions. No panic. Calm. One call. 3 rings. A quiet click. I spoke into the receiver voice even and low. It started. I ended the call. I leaned back into the leather seat, pain in my cheek fading into focus. 10 minutes, I whispered only for myself. 10 minutes, and this flight would not just be a ride to Atlanta. It would be the stage for a reckoning. Around me, the air thickened with the strange tension of witnesses who do not know where justice lies. Nobody tapped keys. Nobody rustled snack bags. Only silence and eyes waiting. I pressed the charm into my collarbone, letting the metal ground me. The old me might have fled, might have cried in an airport bathroom. That version was buried with my mother. This time, I was steel. This time, the slap would echo backward into every theft, every lie, every dismissal. This time, Valora would learn that the maid she dismissed was the architect of the ground beneath her feet. The airport had been humming with that peculiar pre-flight quiet, a kind of subdued tension that feels like waiting rooms before surgeries, and Houston's humidity clung to every surface as I boarded at gate B7. My sneakers squeaked softly against the jet bridge floor, as though even they knew I was trespassing into a place that was never meant for me. First class looked no different to an outsider than the glossy photos in travel magazines, but for me, each leather seat and polished tray table felt like a reminder of the glass walls that had been built around my life. I sat in 2A, tucked into the window seat, clutching my tote like a lifeline. No makeup painted my face. No jewelry other than the chain my mother left me when she passed no signals of wealth or belonging. That chain was not ornament. It was the last piece of her that the others had not stolen. My posture betrayed my wish to be unseen. Across from me, a man in a blazer raised his eyes only long enough to register me, then vanished into his email. Perfect. That was the anonymity I wanted. Yet anonymity never lasts when blood ties carry your name into spaces you did not consent to enter. Then came Valora. She walked the aisle with a stride rehearsed since teenage years, a gait that declared ownership of air itself. Her uniform was crisp bun flawless, her smile poised in that way that made people think she was benevolent, when really she was assessing what to take next. She saw me and froze for a fraction of a second, but disgust quickly overtook surprise. She lowered her voice just enough to draw in the attention of the nearby passengers. "Cleaning crews should not touch leather seats," she hissed, and I offered a polite but toothless smile. "Good morning to you too, Valora." She ignored it, her eyes darting to my sweatshirt and sneakers as though cataloging evidence of unworthiness. "That is first class, you are in the wrong seat," she declared. I handed over my phone with the boarding pass glowing bright, but she would not even touch it. "You always knew how to sneak through doors that were not meant for you." The old insult dressed in new clothes. It carried the same tone she used at the funeral when she implied I was brave to show my face after everything, the same tone that reminded our father that I was never the one to rely on. She turned, letting her words land for maximum audience impact. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A woman rocked her baby tighter. A young man held his breath, sensing family warfare was unfolding in a place meant for silence. I felt the air tighten the atmosphere thick with judgment. Valora leaned closer, her perfume sharp, and hissed again. "You do not belong here." My jaw tightened, but I answered calmly. I paid for the seat. Her laugh was short and cruel. "No, you did not. You could not have." She raised her voice then so that even row 4 could hear. "You are just the maid. How dare you sit here?" The words were spit designed to stick. They did not humiliate me anymore, but they painted me for the others as something less. A little boy asked his mother why that lady was so mean. Pity swept across this woman's face as she looked at me. Another passenger raised a phone, discreet but visible. Valora saw and switched her expression, instantly smiling like it was all a misunderstanding. "Order," she said sweetly. "We like to keep order." That word cracked against my chest. Order was what she had built her life on, order that excluded me from everything my mother had intended me to inherit. I kept my hands folded tight, cataloging every glance and every whisper. I knew evidence when I saw it, even if it was unspoken. Valora's posture radiated entitlement, her words dripping superiority, but beneath it all was fear, the fear she masked with arrogance, the fear that one day the invisible would rise. As she walked back toward the galley, I felt my throat close for a heartbeat, then open again with steadiness. I pressed the charm at my collarbone, feeling its edges bite lightly into my skin, a reminder of my mother's voice telling me silence can cut sharper than words if wielded correctly. The plane had not yet moved, but the energy inside it had shifted. Passengers exchanged glances, weighing whether to speak up, most choosing the safety of silence. I sat straighter, eyes fixed on the aisle, knowing that the game was no longer about humiliation, but about preparation. I was not a guest in this cabin. I was a witness to my own rebirth, and Valora had just given me the stage. The sting on my cheek was still hot, but my mind slipped backward into the years that had built this moment brick by brick, and I saw the outlines of my childhood not as fond memories, but as a ledger of debts never acknowledged. My mother, Eleanor, had been the only one who treated me as if my quietness was not a defect, but a strength, and when cancer took her, it left me alone in a house where my name was always spoken in smaller tones. I remembered the hospital room where lavender lotion tried to mask the bleach and fear. Her hand, thin and weak, placed the silver chain around my neck. "Valora wants everything shiny," she whispered, "but you build what lasts. That is legacy." Her voice cracked, then faded, and within a day she could not speak at all. I buried her with eyes swollen from nights of silence, and Valora arrived 2 days late with a new handbag and a smile rehearsed for pity. No apology, no tears, only a story about delayed flights, as if grief were a schedule one could rearrange. At the will reading, I sat alone at the walnut table surrounded by men in suits, and by my father, Harold Quinn, who spoke to me like I was an intern handling someone else's company. Papers were slid in front of me, filled with clauses I was too numb to read. He told me it was just standard adjustments, that I would still have my share, but Valora's face was the one people recognized. He chuckled when I asked if I should have someone look at it first. "It is just paperwork, baby. We will always take care of you." They handed me my mother's fountain pen, the one she had used for grocery lists and birthday cards, and I signed. That pen still sits on my desk, ink filled manually, as she taught me, a relic of the day I signed away my voice. By the time I realized what had been taken, my stake in the systems, my patents, my seat on the board, it was already notarized and impossible to undo without a lawsuit I could never afford. From then on, I was labeled contract consultant, a ghost in the very company I had helped design. Valora stepped into the spotlight, giving interviews, publishing books, while I was shoved into broom closets of silence and told to be grateful. The family dynamic had always tilted that way. My father praised Valora's charisma, her ability to smile for cameras, while I was told I was too emotional, too quiet, not fit for leadership. At dinners, she would jab lightly in front of him, reminding him that I had struggled to keep jobs, that I lacked the polish she carried like perfume, and he nodded, pleased that one daughter represented the brand while the other remained a hidden laborer. In private, Valora's words cut deeper. She mocked my plain clothes, my lack of makeup, the way I preferred code to cocktails. She called me the maid of the family, the one who cleaned up but never appeared in photos. Every insult layered over the last until it built a shell around me, and inside that shell I whispered promises to myself that one day silence would not mean surrender. The memory of that shell was heavy now as I sat in the plain cheek burning. I thought of the countless times I had walked away to keep peace, how many times I had swallowed bitterness because speaking would only paint me as hysterical. I remembered the night of my college graduation when Valora took the stage with me in photos, smiling brighter than the graduate, and later told friends that I had barely scraped through my classes. I remembered my father shaking hands with investors while I stood in the corner, invisible, though I had written the code that powered their vision. I remembered Valora at the funeral smiling at mourners while whispering to me that showing up was brave for someone who never belonged. Each memory was a needle, and each needle had sewn me into invisibility. But invisibility carries its own power because people stop guarding against the one they believe is powerless. That is why I still had the keys, why the architecture whispered my name even after it was erased from the plaques. My flashback was not nostalgia, it was a map of betrayals, and every path on that map led me back to this cabin where she had slapped me thinking it was just another humiliation in a long line. She did not know that humiliation had matured into resolve, that grief had calcified into strategy. I pressed the chain again, hearing my mother's last words in my memory. "You build the things that last." That was not just comfort, it was instruction. And now, finally, the moment had come to obey. The echo of the slap had not faded when Valora leaned closer, eyes gleaming with that cruel satisfaction she had perfected since childhood. The kind of look that told the world she could get away with anything because she had always gotten away with everything. She hissed low enough for me, but sharp enough for the nearest passengers to catch. "You should get up before I call security." Her voice carried the arrogance of someone who believed her uniform was law. My jaw tightened, but I stayed seated, my body calm, my voice measured. "I am not moving." She laughed, the sound sharp and theatrical, a laugh rehearsed for boardrooms and cameras. "You think this makes you brave." She waited for me to flinch to break, but I did not. Her hand rose again as though to strike a second time, but froze when the hush of the cabin thickened. A young flight attendant named Lena Morales, her face pale with shock, stepped forward from the galley. She could not have been more than 24, her name tag trembling against her chest. "You went too far," she whispered toward Valora, not quietly enough to hide from nearby rows. That was not okay. Valora's smirk faltered, flickered into something less certain before she forced it back. "She is my sister," Valora announced too loudly, performing for the cabin. "Just family drama. Nothing serious?" Her tone was brittle and her eyes betrayed a flicker of nerves. Around me, silence held, but I could sense the shift. Behind me, a teenager muttered, "I got it on video." The sound of those words made my pulse steady because evidence has a weight all its own. Valora straightened her shoulders, forcing control back into her posture, and turned again to me with narrowed eyes. "Cece, why do you not just move to economy so we can break this ridiculous scene?" For the first time in our lives, she blinked before I did. "No," I said softly, but clearly, each syllable carrying through the stillness. Her jaw tightened, her nostrils flared, and for a split second I saw fear creep in. "You do not want this to get worse," she threatened. My eyes held hers. It already did. The passengers reacted with subtle shifts the way a crowd leans when sensing the direction of a storm. One man coughed, another shifted his magazine, but no one dared break the moment. Valora's hand trembled slightly, though she tried to disguise it as an adjustment to her clipboard. Her authority was cracking under the weight of her own aggression. I lifted my hand, not in defense, but to adjust my collar again, brushing the chain my mother had given me, reminding myself that silence was not surrender. The cabin vibrated with suppressed energy the way air feels before thunder. Valora tried again to cover her loss of control. "Sorry for the delay, folks," she announced loudly, smiling like a pageant queen. "Sometimes families get heated. You know how sisters are." The passengers did not laugh. They did not respond at all. Their eyes cut between her smile and my stillness. Her facade slipped further. The man in the blazer across from me leaned slightly toward me, cautious but curious. "Everything okay?" he asked. I smiled without teeth. "It will be." Valora spun back toward the galley, her heels striking sharper than before, her shoulders squared, but her movement stiff. She thought she had re-established dominance, but the silence that lingered belonged not to her, it belonged to me. Every gaze, every phone angled discreetly, every breath held in the aftermath of violence had become my chorus. She had tried to humiliate me in public, but instead she had summoned witnesses. That was the mistake. My cheek still throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat, but beneath it was steel. 10 minutes, I reminded myself. 10 minutes and her certainty would unravel in front of every pair of eyes she had tried to impress. The passengers still murmured in uneasy silence when I reached calmly into my tote and slid out the tablet I carried more out of habit than intention, its black surface reflecting the faint glow of the cabin lights. My fingers moved with precision, not hesitation, tapping the screen until the familiar login appeared. It had been years since I had touched these credentials, yet the system recognized me instantly. Authorization. Cecilia Quinn, System Architect. The words blinked on the screen like a quiet resurrection. No one around me could see, but I felt the power shift under my fingertips. This was not about a seat, not about who looked more polished. This was about who built the foundation beneath every flight that lifted off the ground. I had written the redundancies, the crisis protocols, the architecture they all relied on. They had erased my name from the plaques, but not from the code. Valora thought her slap was the final word, but all she had done was provide the spark. I opened a folder buried beneath layers of encryption, the one I had saved years ago when I discovered the email thread she had authored. Subject line media prep. Content excludes Cecilia. If she ever flies, put her in economy. Do not comp her. Do not seat her near executives. She is not our image. I stared at those words now as clearly as I had the day I found them, and rage steadied into clarity. I tapped forward, sending it to compliance, HR, and internal oversight. Not loud, not dramatic, but lethal in its accuracy. My thumb hovered for only a breath before executing Protocol 1 audit. A chain of silent dominoes began to fall, invisible to passengers, but very real inside the company servers. First, performance logs would desync, then security keys would blink red. Then requests for executive credential confirmations would start landing in inboxes where Valora had no clearance. 10 minutes, I whispered again, grounding myself in the countdown. I lifted my eyes just as Valora returned from the galley attempting her fake apology tour. "Sorry for the delay," she said, voice pitched to sound light. "Sometimes family gets heated. You know how sisters are." But her smile cracked at the edges and her eyes darted toward me. She expected me to flinch, to shrink. Instead, I sat, taller fingers resting casually on the tablet. For the first time, she hesitated. Our gazes locked, and I let mine tell her the truth she never wanted to face. "You erased me. Now I am writing myself back in." She opened her mouth as if to retort, but her crew communicator buzzed. She checked it quickly, and I saw her posture falter. Something had reached her. Good. I leaned back into the seat, the sting of my cheek fading into a colder heat, a sense that the tide had shifted. I did not need to shout. I did not need to defend. I only needed to let the system I built do what it was designed to do. Around me, the passengers still waited, their eyes darting between us, hungry for resolution. They would not have to wait long. I pressed the charm at my neck once more, whispering to myself, "This is not about revenge. It is about correction." My mother's voice returned like a current. "Do not wait for their permission. Build your own place." I had, and now the place was shaking. The cabin vibrated with an invisible tension, as though every breath from the passengers was being weighed against the silence. I kept my eyes forward, but my ears caught the whispers around me. A teenager 2 rows back muttered again. "I got it on video," his voice half excited, half nervous, and the words curled into my chest like armor. Evidence. Not just my word against hers anymore, but digital proof in the age when proof travels faster than lies. A woman across the aisle leaned slightly forward, her eyes soft with concern, and she whispered barely above breath, "Do not let her scare you." That small flicker of solidarity was a thread binding me to the strangers who had become witnesses. Then Lena appeared again, her face pale, but her jaw set firmer than before. She stepped close to Valora and whispered urgent words. "There is a message from corporate." Valora's eyes flashed, then darted down to her tablet. She tapped quickly, her hand trembling despite her attempt to look in control. I could see her pulse racing in the line of her neck. She snapped the cover shut too quickly, as though hiding the message would erase it. The passengers noticed. Silence does not hide tremors. I watched carefully, cataloging not just her fear, but the way the others saw it too. That mattered. People believe their own eyes more than any story. I returned my gaze to my tablet, pulling up the folder again. The email thread glared back at me. She had written it 6 months earlier and forgotten, confident that nobody like me would ever access it again. Exclude Cecilia. Not our image. I forwarded it quietly, sending it into the bloodstream of the company, where oversight committees and compliance teams would not be able to ignore it. My thumb pressed send with the steadiness of someone who had been waiting years. The message confirmed with a soft vibration. Phase 1 executed. Around me, the murmurs grew. One man whispered to his wife. She hit her own sister, and the wife replied, "I cannot believe the company lets this happen." I let the words wash over me, knowing the narrative was shifting without me speaking a single syllable. Valora returned her smile, brittle, her voice higher than normal. "Cece, why do you not just move to economy so we can end this nonsense?" Her words were aimed at me, but her eyes darted nervously toward the passengers, who were clearly no longer convinced by her authority. "No," I answered, calm and final. The sound carried enough that even the back row could sense the line drawn. Valora flinched at the firmness. She threatened, "You do not want this to get worse." I tilted my head slightly. "It already has." That phrase hung heavy, and I saw several passengers nod, subtle but real. Allies were forming not because I begged, but because truth was visible. Lena stepped closer to me this time, her voice low but firm. "I will report what happened," she promised, and I nodded once in acknowledgement. Even one ally inside the system can shift the tide. My fingers tapped another command. Protocol 1 expanding. Internal compliance flagged the thread. I knew it would not take long before the chain reaction reached higher floors. 10 minutes was not just a promise, it was architecture unfolding. I sat straighter eyes on the aisle as Valora shifted uncomfortably, her control slipping inch by inch, while every witness took silent note. The hum of the aircraft systems filled the silence as I kept my posture steady. My eyes fixed on the aisle where Valora paced like a caged queen whose crown was beginning to crack. My tablet buzzed softly against my thigh with the confirmation I had been waiting for. The compliance team had flagged her email and internal risk management had escalated it. The system I built was alive again, moving through layers she never even knew existed. At 9:46, Lena approached her with another message, and I watched Valora's face tighten as she read. Her jaw flexed, her smile strained, but her eyes betrayed panic. She lifted her water bottle to cover the twitch in her lips, but the passengers saw. Silence turned electric. At 9:48, her corporate phone buzzed, the one reserved for emergencies and executive directives. She answered in the galley, her voice low but sharp fragments carrying back to me. Compliance. What basis? Who filed this? Then silence. She froze, eyes darting to the wall as though answers were hidden in the metal panels. At 9:51, I received a push notification. Stage 1 protocol confirmed. Crisis operations routed to Gate B7. I pressed the charm at my collarbone, grounding myself as my mother's voice echoed in memory, use what you built. The cabin door opened mid-prep, an impossible break in routine, and two individuals in dark suits stepped in with airport security behind them. They walked calmly, directly, their presence heavy with authority that needed no badges. Passengers gasped as they moved down the aisle, bypassing row after row until they stopped in front of Valora. "Ma'am," one of them said evenly, "we need you to gather your things." Her eyes widened, her mouth opened then closed, words trapped by disbelief. "I am on duty. You cannot just—" But the agent interrupted. "We are acting under directives from Internal Risk Management and FAA compliance. Please gather your belongings now." The passengers inhaled sharply, the current of whispers moving like a wave. Phones rose discreetly, cameras blinking. Valora's fingers shook as she reached for her satchel, her eyes refusing to meet mine. She was escorted off the plane in a silence so heavy it felt like judgment itself. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are addressing a personnel matter in accordance with regulations. Service will resume shortly." There was no sarcasm, no comfort, only fact. Then something remarkable happened. A single clap from somewhere near the front, then another. Then slowly, softly, the sound spread. Not a roar, not mockery, just a quiet collective recognition that accountability had arrived. I did not join. I did not need to. I looked out the window, my reflection clear against the glass for the first time in years. My phone buzzed again. Stage 2 approved full audit inbound. I smiled quietly, not triumphant, but steady. Valora had tried to bury me in silence, and now silence had turned against her, exposing every crack. The dominoes had started to fall, and there was no stopping the collapse she had set in motion with her own arrogance. The silence after Valora's removal lingered like smoke, heavy and inescapable, and while the passengers slowly returned to their magazines and phones, my own screen lit with a name that dragged me into a different battlefield. Harold Quinn. My father. For a moment, my hand hovered above the accept button. Then I pressed it, and his voice came through, clipped, not furious, but irritated, as though I had dented his car and the insurance would not cover it. "Cecilia, what in God's name are you doing?" he said, his tone lined with the familiar contempt of a man who measured daughters not by their worth, but by their usefulness to his reputation. "You are dragging the family through the mud." I breathed slowly, eyes on the seat back in front of me. "No," I answered. "I am dragging the truth out from under it." He exhaled sharply, the sound of dismissal. "You have always been too emotional. That is why you never led. You build things, but leadership requires distance and control." His words pressed against old wounds that had never healed, but I did not flinch. "No, Dad. What you call leadership is silence, and I have been silent for a decade." He shifted into defense. "Valora made things work. She knew how to represent the brand. She kept us from being embarrassed. The sting of those words was not new, but hearing them now while the system I built unraveled her empire gave them a bitter irony. She lied. She humiliated me. She stole credit for everything I created, I said firmly. He snapped back. She built the image, you built the system. Do not confuse value with visibility. The call ended with me whispering the words that had haunted me for years. And you helped. He said nothing before the line clicked dead. My hands folded tight, not trembling, but steady. He was never going to see me as anything but a support beam behind Valora's house of mirrors. My tablet buzzed again, and this time the screen filled with the sterile faces of a boardroom thousands of miles away. EtherCorp headquarters, daylight slicing through glass walls behind the directors. 3 of them sat waiting, their silence heavy. I straightened in my seat and spoke clearly. This is not about an upgrade, it is about a system that buried contributions rather than confronted bias. Today, I was assaulted by your lead crew member, my sister Valora Quinn, the same sister your executives elevated because she photographed better and spoke smoother while I was erased. I held up my ID badge to the camera, Cecilia Quinn, systems architect, founding partner, the person who designed the crisis response protocols you are now watching unfold. They did not interrupt, but I felt the shift in their silence, the recognition they could no longer deny. One of them finally spoke. Miss Quinn, we acknowledge receipt of the reports and media files submitted. We are prepared to offer public apology restitution and a platform to speak about integrity across branches. I did not smile. I do not want a stage, I said I want reform. Remove every executive who signed off on erasing my name. Remove every HR head who buried complaints and permanently ban Valora from representing any brand under your umbrella. The chairman glanced off-screen, receiving legal opinion, then returned his eyes to me. Do you have proof of intentional suppression? I smiled faintly. You are already watching it. He nodded slowly. We will begin removals immediately. My fingers moved to the staff access interface, one I still controlled, and one by one, names turned gray. Vice President access revoked. Director of Communications disabled. Valora Quinn, permanent ban processed. Across my secondary feed, a live camera caught her outside the terminal, her sunglasses hiding eyes that still flickered with fear as reporters thrust microphones. I built this brand, she insisted she was just back-end. But the tide had shifted. Headlines flashed, Fall of a Queen, Rise of the Quiet Architect. Social media erupted with testimony from staff she had silenced. Carla, a flight attendant, posted, I was told to hide my accent to wear heavier makeup. Cecilia is not just clearing her name, she is clearing space for all of us. Another gate agent wrote, She said what we never could. Each line built the chorus that drowned out her curated perfection. The weight of years of silence cracked, and in its place was a voice not just mine, but a chorus of the forgotten. The weight of years that had pressed on my chest began to shift as the notifications poured into my tablet like a storm breaking through locked windows. Internal memos leaked resignations, marked urgent emergency PR drafts, scrambled across departments, and in the middle of it all, my name reappeared in the system where it had been erased. Cecilia Quinn reinstated. I whispered the word justice under my breath as if tasting it for the first time. Not sweet, not bitter, but steady and necessary. The media picked up the story within minutes. A CNN affiliate caught Valora outside the terminal, her voice rising too high as she insisted she had been the face of the brand while I was just back-end. But the footage told another truth. The footage of her slapping me, the footage of her dismissing me as a maid, and then the avalanche of testimony from employees she had humiliated. The video of her training session surfaced her voice commanding attendants to be pretty to hide accents, to throw away jewelry that did not sparkle enough. The internet reacted with fury. Thousands of comments flooded in from staff, from customers, from strangers who recognized abuse wrapped in polish. She bullied us in silence. She called me non-camera ready. She said I did not fit the brand. Finally, someone flipped the switch. My phone buzzed again with the secure message I had been waiting for. You are no longer bound by the 2014 NDA. Proprietary acknowledgments reinstated. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the truth sink in. They could no longer bury me legally or personally. The NDA had been their weapon, now it was dust. My hand found the silver charm at my collarbone, pressing it into my skin until I felt both pain and grounding. Across the aisle, the man in the blazer leaned toward me again, his voice quiet but sure. "It looks like they are finally seeing you." I met his eyes for the first time and nodded. "Yes," I said finally. Valora's downfall was not the loud collapse she might have expected in her nightmares. It was slower, quieter, like paper burning from the edges unstoppable once lit. Her accounts were frozen, her authority revoked, her face plastered across news networks not as a heroine of customer service, but as the emblem of corporate rot. In boardrooms across the country, people whispered about the quiet architect the woman erased and returned. I did not crave the fame, but I welcomed the correction. In the days that followed, the company issued official apologies not just to me, but to the staff she had dismissed. Compensation packages were processed, compliance officers fired, HR heads replaced. It was not revenge for spectacle's sake. It was the consequence of truth exposed to light. Yet I could not deny the private satisfaction of knowing that the sister who once told me I would never belong was now the one shut out of every room she tried to enter. One night, as the storm of coverage reached its peak, my father called again. This time, he did not sound irritated. He sounded tired, his voice stripped of authority. "Cecilia, what happens now?" he asked, and I heard behind the words a recognition that his chosen heir had fallen. I answered simply, "Now the company learns that visibility without integrity collapses, and I build what lasts." He did not argue. He did not even hang up abruptly as before. He only breathed heavy, then ended the call. In that moment, I realized even he understood that the daughter he had overlooked was the one who had rebuilt the truth from rubble. The revenge was public, but the consequence was deeper etched into every headline, every resignation, every whispered conversation in airports. Valora had slapped me believing no one would care. 10 minutes later, the airline itself trembled under the weight of the system I designed. That was not revenge alone. That was justice calibrated to precision. 1 year later, I stood in Concourse A of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, not as a passenger clutching a boarding pass, but as a woman carrying a modest envelope in my hands and a speech folded carefully inside. The air smelled of strong coffee and floor polish, the same as it had when I used to feel invisible walking these halls, but nothing felt hostile anymore. The terminal buzzed with the usual announcements and rushing footsteps, yet, for me, the sound had softened into something steady, almost kind. A small platform had been set near the windows, with a banner stretched above it reading, "The Quinn Initiative Launch." Chairs were lined for media representatives, aviation safety leaders, and a handful of guests who had once been like me, erased voices finally being recognized. In the front row sat 2 young women in their early 20s, daughters of single mothers, who had worked in custodial services, each holding acceptance letters that announced their scholarships funded by the initiative. I approached the podium, asked for the microphone to remain off, and spoke softly. "This is not redemption," I said. "This is correction. For every woman who cleaned floors while others took the spotlight, for every voice told to stay quiet, you were always enough. You just were not seen." The crowd did not clap loudly. They listened, and that meant more. After handing the envelopes to the recipients and shaking their trembling hands, I walked slowly through the terminal, savoring the simple act of moving freely without the old weight pressing on my ribs. Near gate A27, I noticed a little girl with braided hair and a purple backpack staring up at a digital kiosk that displayed employee profiles and historic contributors. On the screen was my photograph, not glamorous, but honest me in a lab coat smiling over a line of code on a whiteboard from 10 years ago. The girl turned her eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you the lady up there?" she asked. I knelt so we were eye level. "Yes, it took a long time to get there." She grinned. "My mom said you built the smart stuff, not the pretty stuff." I chuckled. "That is true." She ran off to catch her family, and I stood again with a calm I had never known before. From across the terminal, I saw Valora wiping down a counter in a private clinic lounge, her uniform plain, her name tag absent. She looked up, our eyes met for one suspended breath. There was no smirk, no apology, only understanding. We had both lost something, but only one of us had earned what remained. I turned away, first, not out of pride, but because closure had already been written. Later that night at home, I sat in my office where my mother's sewing box still rested in the corner and her handwritten note reading, "You are enough," was taped to my lamp. I logged into the new internal archive the company had launched to honor women in systems development and whistleblower protection. Scrolling slowly, I found my name listed among the contributors. Cecilia Quinn, systems architect, founding partner, co-creator, the Quinn Protocol. I reached for the silver necklace no longer hidden under clothes but visible against my blouse, letting it catch the light. I logged out, turned off the lamp, and sat in the quiet. Not everyone who is erased finds their way back, I knew that, but my mother's whisper guided me even now. You do not have to be loud to be remembered, you just have to leave something they cannot rewrite. I had. And in that truth, I finally rested.